Physicians, stop using the term women's health to talk about obstetrics and gynecology. That's right. I am asking you, physicians, I'm asking all of the healthcare providers, the healthcare administrators, stop using the term women's health to refer to obstetrics and gynecology. Today, I'm going to explain to you why I think you should stop using that term and how it'll help you better serve your patients. So, I'm going to start out by talking to you about why it matters. I'm going to tell you address some of the common objections that I hear. So, right now, if you're listening to this, you're going, can't do that, Shannon. Here's why A, B, and C. I'm probably going to address those. So, listen in. And then I'm going to talk to you about the things I see, the changes I see being made that are moving things in the right direction and the further suggestions that I have. Now, if you didn't listen to last week's podcast, where I challenge healthcare providers to pay attention to when they're using gendered language and when they're using binary language, and what are options to be more inclusive and what other terms could be used. There are a lot of examples, but the main one I was thinking about, and this is why I mentioned obstetricians, gynecologists, especially can notice this, is how much gendered language is used there. And just from the beginning, most departments refers to the work they do as part of women's health. So this is why it matters to stop referring to obstetrics and gynecology as women's health. The first reason is we're losing a subset of patients. I have heard many people tell me who are transgender men, who are non binary patients, tell me they do not feel comfortable going into spaces that are referred to as women's spaces. And so we're losing that subset of patients. But beyond that, I've also spoken to cisgender women, so women that were designated female at birth that identify as women that have a masculine expression because what they tell me is when they go into spaces that are deemed women's spaces, quote unquote, they are often policed. They are often questioned about their biology, about their identity. And it's very uncomfortable. They do not feel welcomed. It's very upsetting for many of them. So they avoid women's spaces or spaces deemed as, quote, women's. There are also patients that may have organs and tissue that fall under gynecology that are men. A man who is intersex may have an ovary or two. I'm not going to list all the things, but to be a man that have organs that fall under gynecology, it's not easy to go into space when it's deemed as women. So we are losing a subset of patients that have to decide, do I get uncomfortable and go into that space, or do I just ignore that aspect of my healthcare? The second reason I think it matters to stop using that is sometimes the language we're using is inaccurate. We are not talking correctly. Using the language women is not accurate. Or even another example is moms. Let me give you an example of what I mean. If a lactation group decides to refer to itself as a mom's group, they probably aren't going to do that. They won't. Why? Because not everyone who identifies as a mom is going to breastfeed. So they already recognize that and usually put a term on there like breastfeeding moms. But there's a reason they don't refer to it as a mom's group because they realize that it doesn't include everyone that identify as mom. I would take that a step further and say not every parent who breastfeeds identify as a mom either. So here's a 2-question test that I give. So if you're going to refer to something in a gender term like women's or moms, then here's a 2-question test. The first question is, do I mean all of that gender? So in the case of women's health, do I mean all women? Now, I can't answer that question. It depends on your department. What I'm thinking about is transgender women that have had bottom surgery that do require a pelvic exam. I'll talk some other time about why, but are you willing? Do you feel capable and competent to treat those women? If you do not feel comfortable treating transgender women, then you're not treating women. You are treating certain organ systems. But the second question, say, no, we're comfortable treating all women, including transgender women. Okay, excellent. So if you can answer that, you treat all of that gender identity. Then the second question, do you treat more than that gender identity? Are you not including people in that terminology? And so, again, for women's health, the answer is yes. I just talked about that in the previous point, which is there may be men, there may be non binary patients. So, you treat more than that language. So, it fails the two question test, at least question number two, if not one as well. So, again, the two questions are do I treat all of that identity? And the second one is do I treat more than that identity? And if you could say, I treat all of that identity, yes, and no, I don't treat more than that identity, then I would say use the gender term. But when it comes to women's health, it doesn't pass the test. The third point of why it matters, why we should stop using women's health to refer to OBGYN, is if we desire to be an inclusive department, we are not being inclusive. We are not demonstrating that we understand gender. Because if we understood gender, we would not use a gender term like women to refer to biological characteristics or biological sex. They're two separate things. And when we use a gender term to refer to biology, we are demonstrating that we may not understand the difference between the two. You go, no, 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 I understand. You're not demonstrating. Think about this. Your website, your mission statement is often the first thing people see. Your signage is often the first thing people see. And when I see it, I question how much trouble are patients going to have going in there that are transgender or non binary because this organization, this department, this institution does not demonstrate they know the difference between gender and biological sex. So at this point, many of you may be already like going on your objections and maybe speaking to me through the speaker. So let's talk about some of those objections because trust me, I think I've probably heard them. The first one, the most common one I hear is we're just talking about a small subset of patients. People know what it means. It's just a small subset of patients. Well, maybe, yes, it might be a small subset of patients, but are you willing to say, I'm not going to provide care to all patients that fall in my category of obstetrics and gynecology? I'm willing to let some go that need my care because I can't change my language. I can't change my wording. So that is part of the issue is that, yes, it might be a small subset of patients. I've already spelled it out who they are earlier. But are you willing to do that? And that really comes, I can't answer that question for you, actually. That comes down to you and your department and your institution's values. What are your values and what are your priorities? If you tell me that your values are inclusivity and treating all patients with dignity and respect, then you're not doing it. If you want to do that, then the language has to change so that people feel welcome. People know that you understand and they know that the space is for them. The second objection I often hear is well, if we don't use the term women's health, people won't know where to go. People understand women's health. And there is some truth that people have not been taught, patients have not always been taught that what obstetrics and gynecology mean. And I often ask people this when I hear that. Why is there no men's health? We don't see institutions that say men's health. I'm sure there might be some somewhere, but in general, we don't see it. And you can argue, well, most of health is men's health because most of research that is originally done, and I think we're much better about it now, but originally a lot of research done was on cisgender men. And so that's the information that we have. But I'm talking about just like gynecology is about certain organ systems. I'm talking about where do people that have a prostate and a scrotum and testicles and etc. Where do they go? The answer is they may go to their primary care, just like people might do for gynecology. And then if they need more extensive care, more detailed care, they go to the urologist. That's right. They go to the urologist. We are not saying, well, gosh, we better call it men's health, or how else are they going to find it? Why don't we worry that that's gonna happen there, that we need to call it men's health or they're not gonna find where they need to go? How do they find it? I mean, urology is not an everyday word. Somehow, we believe they'll figure it out. So why don't we believe that other patients can figure out their organ systems and where they need to go? Maybe, and just maybe, you might say, well, it's different. Urologists treat all genders. I believe OBGYN does too. And you're like, no, 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 that's not what I mean. You know what I mean, Shannon. They treat all systems. And so I have an interesting story for you about that. When I was a medical student, I did not have a desire to go into urology. No offense, just wasn't interested. But I had a friend that did, a friend that identified as a woman. And I remember her being told by the urology department where we trained that, oh, maybe you should find something else because urology is really for men. That's what they told her. Urology is really for men. And we know it's not. They take care of all systems, but it was predominantly at that time. Yet, even then, we didn't call it men's health. We still felt like they can find their way there. Why don't we believe women can find their way? Now, there's one thing I have not mentioned why many marketing systems, why the business side of medicine does not want to get rid of the term women's health. And there was a paper out of Harvard that demonstrated that in a family, and I'm going to use the language they used, but 80% of the medical decision making was made by, quote, women. I assume the matriarchs or the caregivers in the family that identified as women. 80%, which means if you market to people who identify as women, to those matriarchs, they are going to decide where the rest of the family goes. So it is a financial benefit to get those who identify as women into your institution, to get those matriarchs that are the decision makers into your institution because they are the main decision maker. Now, if you want to call it women's health for that reason, then own it. Own that your value, your priority, maybe is a better word to say, that the value of inclusivity is not your priority. That's what it comes down to. You have to decide your values and your priorities, and then you can make a decision from there. I hope that we can live in a world where we want to treat all patients, as I've seen in so many mission statements. And I've looked at a lot of OB/GYN mission statements lately with dignity and respect and getting patients the health care they deserve. If we want to do that, and if that is truly our top priority or a high priority, I should say, and a value, we have to stop using the term women's health. Now, we've had some progress. Sometimes when I talk about these things, I remember seeing a few years ago guidelines for cervical cancer screening in the American Cancer Society. And the language at the time was women need pap smears as often. It was women, women, women all throughout. Go a few years later under the guidelines with the CDC, and they use the term patients with a cervix. This is how often they need it. Patients with the cervix, patients with their cervix. They never once mention women, which makes sense. Goes back to rule number the reason it matters number 2, right? It wasn't accurate. Not all women have a cervix. Whether they were not born with one or whether they had it surgically removed, just like there are people that are born with a cervix who are not women. So there is that type of progress. If somebody recognized the gendered language and how it's not accurate, didn't pass those 2 questions. But also, as I've mentioned, I've looked at a lot of OB/GYN mission statements, a lot of departments' mission statements, and I am starting to see a recognition. Like one department, they use, I think twice in their mission, they use the term women. It is followed with and all genders. The other, and the ideal, in my opinion, was a department that I saw that just referred to obstetrics and gynecology and talked about the different aspects of care, cervical screening, mammography, whatever else was under there. They just wrote it out and they did not once mention the term women. That is the direction I think we need to go. If we are talking about general obstetrics and gynecology, when we refer to them, let's teach people that's the terminology. Let's trust that our patients can find the care they need with the body systems, just like we do with all other body systems, because there are a lot of terms, the pulmonologist, that we've had to teach people to know that's lungs. Why do we think we can't do it with this? I think we can. And not only do I think we can, but I think we can serve all patients so much better by using obstetrics and gynecology and stop using women's health. Because at the end of the day, it's not accurate. And language matters.